Hello and welcome to Critique of the Week, episode 8. This week we are joined by Meg Wade. Meg, how are you?
I'm great. How are you, Matt?
I am pretty good, pretty good. All right, so first thing everyone wants to know, who are you?
My name is Meg Wade. I am a poet. I live in Nashville, Tennessee. I just finished my first chapbook, and it's out from Tupelo Press. It's called Slick Like Dark. I run an arts event series here in Nashville called Bewitched, and we put on these really weird and wild poetry art installation series. And I am currently a Master's of Divinity student at Vanderbilt University.
Well, it sounds like you stay busy. All right, so we will see some of that in these poems here, I think. First, we are going to ask you to read the first draft of what became Field Notes. Originally, that was titled Deliberation The Gospel, and I will get it up here on our screen. All right, whenever you are ready.
All right. Deliberation the Gospel. I called you from the truck stop. I planned to sleep there all night. The attendant mumbled something over the loudspeaker about how unattended baggage may be suspect, but I was busy talking to you, so I wasn't paying attention. I was too concerned about the caution tape surrounding the entrance. Relief shouldn't need a warning. I only pulled the car to the side of the road to unclench my hands in the first place. Inside, the fluorescent bulbs balloon warmly. The window's dirty glass chimes like a place I cannot climb into yet. Who wants to go to heaven alone? You once told me I felt pain so deeply you needed to build a bridge over it wide enough for us both to stand on. You bought green muck boots. You became a carpenter. You told me, you have to be tough with fruit trees. Don't let them outstay their welcome. So I uprooted everything. No more peaches. Suddenly it was night and I couldn't find the bridge anymore. Where was the bridge? My search is poorly lit. The lazy capo of the moon, drunk and forgetting, darkness doesn't destroy, it only confuses. I keep straining to see. Wood or lake or figure. At what have I arrived?
All right, thank you. The final version of this poem does end up in your chapbook, Slick Like Dark, as we can see here. And it is much longer and sectioned. How did you go about expanding and editing this first draft?
You know, going back to the first draft, when I went to go look it up, I can see the process of wanting to do it in sections, because I had these moments that I was clinging to, this moment at the truck stop, this moment with the fruit trees. Like, there were these images that I knew I wanted to keep, but I couldn't quite understand how to get there. And I often use sections in the book to be able to keep the vignettes within the same poem, but to sort of have them not feel as one, but to also feel a little bit more linear, because so much of my narrative structure becomes super wildly lyrical and filled with holes. So I wanted to keep the vignettes there, and I wanted to keep them all under the umbrella of the poem, but I wanted them to be separate rooms within themselves.
Gotcha. So that kind of led into the second question about the sections, right? So you see them as these different vignettes under an umbrella. Like, how big does the umbrella get? You know, like, I'm just thinking here in terms of like, you're putting together a collection, or you're putting together, several poems to send out for submission. Like, how do you think in terms of that scope?
That's a really good question. So I guess there's maybe an umbrella, and then there's also a pavilion. So if we're just like going with everything inside, it's like those little Russian dolls, it's things on top of the other things. The sections always stay within the poems. So they operate like, usually it's like 1 to 5 sections that I'll sort of work in between. And then as I'm putting together a collection, I'm thinking about the narrative, because I usually am only writing with one speaker in mind. So all of the vignettes are housed in sort of the pavilion of the chapbook, because especially in Slick, it was one speaker with a pierced narrative throughout. So you get the whole story as the book goes along. So really, each poem is a section.
Right.
Kind of. Now that I'm thinking about it, each poem is a section and a vignette in itself, and then there are these little micro moments within the poems that I also try and keep together.
Totally, yeah. I was thinking about this poem, "The Peaches Return," from poem 1 in the chapbook. And this poem is what, 3/4 of the way-ish through?
Mm-hmm.
And those peaches come back, and I'm like, wait a minute, I've seen those peaches somewhere. And I was like, looking back through there, and it was the first poem, and I was like, oh, yep, there they are. So I think that's really cool. And I think people should use the word pavilion much more often than they do.
I think so too. More parks, more potlucks for poems.
Exactly. Another thing that appears in your poems a lot is white space. How do you decide how to use white space? And how do you place it on the page? Where do you break and why do you break? Those types of things.
I really like white space because I come originally from a very oral background. Poetry for me was always heard before it was ever written. And so I think about how I would read it in my voice. And therefore, I'm trying to give, if there's lots of breath there, I want to give the audience some room to sit in a line. The white space is sort of inverted there. The poem Field Notes and the earlier version of the poem, I like to call that skeet shot. So it sort of looks like you took a poem, you took the vignette if it was like in a paragraph, and you just like skeet shot it and all the pieces fell. So those are my skeet shot poems. And when I break the line, I got really obsessed with line breaks when I started with Slick, and was very into the sort of the friction of that, and like really trying to drive that line, the eyes to the next line, and the eyes to the next line, and the eyes to the next line. And so with that white space, I got to kind of like play, if we were on a roll with one line and you had to cut down and in white space. Like, I wanted it to be a propulsion because I knew there was going to be a lot of breath and a lot of sort of tender or hard moments that I wanted to give breath in between, and then right back to the whizzing through.
Yeah, it reminds me a lot of how you read in general. Like, when you go to a Meg Wade reading, there's going to be like these pauses that at first you don't, if you haven't seen Meg Wade read, you're surprised by a little bit. But then as you experience it, right, sometimes it's uncomfortable, sometimes it's joyous, it allows these different emotions to come in, I think, in a different way. So I think that's really useful, particularly for how you give a poetry reading, because it offers this space of suspense where, like, you're in the audience and you're like, uh-oh, what's going to happen next? Or I can't wait for what happens next, and you're like there and you're like, oh, I don't know. So I love that.
Oh, I'm glad. I really like to invite that sort of like that moment where the audience and whatever I'm doing, like, because there are moments that are uncomfortable that I leave, and I do that on purpose. And there are moments where I'm like, oh yeah, you're coming with me. Like, I want everybody to be in the room together. Somebody calls it like my the screwdriver effect. They're like, it's like you have this, like this old screwdriver and you're driving it into us, but at the same time you're like patting us on the shoulder and you're like, no, it's going to be okay. She's like, that's what the spaces feel like.
Oh yeah, no, it's great. It's great. Um, I recently read an interview that you did with Nashville Scene, and you described Slick Like Dark as, quote, a horny book of sad country songs, end quote. How do you see arousal affecting the rhythm of your poems?
Man, yeah, arousal. I like that idea of arousal because I am always fixated on desire in my poems, which is different than arousal, right? Like desire is sort of the thing that arousal stems from. And so I'm always focused on desire. But if I'm thinking about arousal in the music of my poems, I really am constantly trying to like get to this rhythm that feels almost like natural. Like, I don't know if you can hear right now, the cicadas outside are singing. They're here for God knows why. They're supposed to be here next year, but it's money. So, but there's like this rhythm of long, short, long. And it's so it feels like kissing, or it feels like touching. It feels like these moments that like feel very natural within the body. But when you're reading it sentence wise, or you're reading it with the line break, or you're reading it, with absolutely no breath. It's like, I really like this idea that you're asking of the arousal of that, because it feels even more urgent than desire would within the music.
Yeah, I mean, and it's interesting how these terms kind of play into each other in a certain way. And I think in the interview you said something like, who would want to read this type of book? And,
yeah.
And I was like, I mean, yeah, I think that's like a good way to get some people. Sure, maybe not everybody wants to read that, but I was like, I don't know, it sounds like a pretty good sell for me.
yeah I was like, during that interview I was like, this is gonna be like this is the jacket copy. Like, I walked away and I was like, that's gonna be the thing that hangs, because I was really trying to figure out how to like describe it, and that's all I could come up with. I'm like, it's the pandemic had just started. We were all at that point like, this might be like a month. And I had like planned this book tour, and I had this big book party, and I was going to do all of these things, and I was like, oh man, no, now everybody's depressed and we have this pandemic, and who wants to read this book right now?
Turns out, probably a lot of people.
A few people read it. It feels nice. It feels nice. But like I said, if it makes you feel anything, I think that's a good thing.
Definitely. All right, well, let's take a look at the final version of Field Notes. I will bring it up here. And whenever you're ready to read it for us.
Field Notes. I called you from the truck stop. I plan to sleep there all night. The attendant mumbled something over the loudspeaker about how unattended baggage may be suspect, but I was busy talking to you, so I wasn't paying attention. I was too concerned about the caution tape surrounding the entrance. Why must relief need a warning? I only pulled the car over to unclench my hands in the first place. 2. You once told me I felt pain so deeply, you needed to build a bridge over it wide enough for us both to stand on. You bought green muck boots. You became a carpenter. You told me you have to be tough with fruit trees. Don't let them outstay their welcome. I uprooted everything. No more peaches. 3. Dead bees tangled in my hair means July is almost over. The rain against the rhododendron tunnels makes the forest roar and seem impossible to leave. You haul the garbage bags full to the side of the road, and we do terrible things to each other. How did you picture this ending? We flip the switch. The light goes off. Surely even the sea forgets its wreckage. 4. Night flooded and I couldn't find the bridge anymore. Was there a bridge? The lazy capo of the moon, drunk and forgetting, darkness doesn't destroy. It only confuses. I thought I saw you in the fog, but it was only a stranger standing beside a fence. Shadows ambush like evening medications. My clumsy hands no longer pointing to the moon, but at the pink ribbon blood makes when it mixes with water and circles the drain. Tell me, where is the bridge? If this is really what I think this is, then I cannot screw this up. 5. I climbed into the car, spread the atlas across the dashboard. Look at how much space I'll live without you. 6. I unbraided my long hair in the rear view. Every exit sign a vertebrae along the highway's back. Possibility without the bruises. Sweetheart, I'm ready to confess tomorrow isn't coming for us. I pulled the car over, whispered your name into a shoebox and abandoned it in the river where we surrender the things we long for most. The empty passenger seat is real, and it must no longer depend on you. I mistake shadows for churches. I can build a whole world out of lack.
Thank you. There are so many good lines in that poem. And I was thinking about your recent beginning of divinity school, as well as the poems in Slick Like Dark. And, I was intrigued by, how you think about space, how you think about belief, and what is and is not available within those spaces. So I was wondering, how do you think one travels these roads of space and belief in poetry and in life?
Wow, that is a really good question that I think I'm still trying to figure out, honestly. And I think that's probably a big reason that I'm back in school, in divinity school right now, is trying to figure out who I am as a poet and how I do travel this world, this road of belief in life and on the page. I think for me, a lot of it is going to language itself and sort of figuring out the weight and the power of that, which, I think we as poets always know. But I'm learning right now in my Hebrew Bible class, which I never thought I would ever take in my life, that like in one sentence, the same Hebrew word means shrewd, and in the next it means naked, which it blows my mind. As a poet, like immediately I'm like, this one word does two totally different things. two lines, and this one it starts, and like immediately I'm jumping to how these things are being used, and turned on their head and played with, and it's, and then how it's then been misinterpreted, right, throughout history. There's a lot of like liberties that are taken with biblical lyric, it turns out. So it's been, even, the last couple weeks of being in school, I am still sort of learning the ways and the roads that I can take to get closer to language and sort of zero in on that, and then completely have it bowl me over still. And I think that's the best way that I know how to walk that road, is to let myself be surprised constantly, and to like invite that possibility and invite that surprise of wanting to be totally blown away with my jaw hanging open and being like, are you kidding me? I want that from poetry as much as I want that from my belief systems, from the hope that I have for humanity and all of these things. I want to constantly be slack-jawed.
Well, I mean, I think that's what you're doing totally in your work already. I know it was such an out there question, but I don't know, it was like what I was thinking about when I was reading it, and I was like, I don't know how to put this into words as a question so much. But let's try it here, you know. But I think you did that, in field notes. There's that bridge that keeps coming back, and we're like, there is a bridge, there isn't a bridge, right? And this you is there and not there, right? So it's like you're figuring out that road as you move along, both in life and throughout the poem, right?
And that's actually why I don't even remember what I was thinking with the title Deliberation The Gospel. I'm going to be completely honest. Like, I even went back and I was like, what the hell was I thinking? Like, I was trying to get to that place, and maybe it's because there's that line, I don't want to go to heaven, or who wants to go to heaven alone, which it gets subverted into another poem as please don't let me go to heaven alone. I saw several as I was going back there. I'm like, several of these snuck their way into some other poems. But field notes was absolutely, this idea of like belief and space, and like there is a road, and there is, these notes almost along the way. I wanted to sort of feel like that, because that is very much what the poem was about. Was, all right, we're going from A to B to C to, we're traveling to these different points. And fingers crossed.
That's all we can do at this point, right? Yeah. All right. Well, on that note, we are going to end for the day. Check out Meg Wade's chapbook, Slick Like Dark, out on Tupelo Press. Meg, thank you so much for joining One Week Critique and the Critique of the Week.
Thank you for having me.
All right. Thanks.